I was working with a couple recently, and something interesting emerged in the session. The husband became very concerned that his wife was going to leave him, even though she repeatedly told him she had no such intentions. He responded to this perceived threat by being overly kind, ingratiating, and avoiding anything that would make her upset, even at the expense of his own intentions, needs, and boundaries in the relationship. This perceived threat even took on a quality of paranoia, and that he would often accuse her of having affairs behind his back. He had no evidence of this, mind you, only his suspicion that this was a signpost to being abandoned. This is one example of what abandonment trauma can look like, and it's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to Trauma-Free Relationship. I'm Tom Philp, your host, and as a therapist, I've spent over 10,000 hours helping couples work through their trauma so they can repair ruptures, heal their wounds, and communicate from a place of wholeness and connection. Let's get started. Okay, as I mentioned in the opening, we're going to talk about healing abandonment trauma today. Now, this is not different per se than other types of trauma, but it's certainly a specific kind of trauma that can really devastate people that are afflicted with this in their relationships. Because what happens is they become very hyper-focused on their partner's moods, intentions, motives, behavior that might lead to them being abandoned. And as we all know, when we're hyper-focused to something, it means we also exclude other things in our line of sight, so to speak. And so we can filter out information that might help make us feel more safe and more comfortable, like in the opening, this woman repeatedly reassuring the husband. But no matter how often she reassured him, he still felt this underlining feeling that she was going to leave him. And of course, as we all know, that if we tend to ruminate on things long enough, then we can also become a little bit paranoid that they're going to happen. And then this can essentially become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If this young man continues in this line of questioning, continues to be so scared his wife is going to leave him, eventually she's going to tire of this line of questioning. She's going to start pulling away. Maybe she won't leave him officially, but she will start shutting down. She will start pulling away. She will start feeling disconnected, which will make his anxiety go up all that much more. And so it becomes sort of this cycle they can get caught in, where this feeling and fear of abandonment is the driver of that cycle. So let's talk about 3 causes of abandonment trauma. What might cause this? Because we're talking about relational trauma, and more often than not, it is placed somewhere in our childhood or adolescence. And so certainly early childhood experiences of neglect or inconsistent parenting can lead to a child feeling insecure and unloved. It can lead to fostering a deep-rooted fear of abandonment. And so early on in our childhood, if we don't get the kind of responsiveness from a parent that we need and desire in certain moments, when we're scared, when we really need them, when we're sad and need them to comfort us, when they are not available and responsive, or if it is inconsistent, then that can lead to the feeling of abandonment, because we don't know when they're going to be there for us or when they're not going to be there for us. And that can respond internally inside of us with this increased anxiety. So that's one cause. Another cause is loss of a loved one. So the death of a parent or caregiver can be a significant source of abandonment trauma, especially for children that feel they have been abandoned. This can also be a grandparent that raised you or that you were particularly close to as well. So often I hear stories about how parents were not always capable of really raising their children, so oftentimes a grandparent might step in, or I have somebody tell me in their attachment history that, oh, I really was raised by my grandmother, grandfather, or so on and so forth, and they were more like a parent to me. And then, of course, if they are older, which usually they are, and they pass away, if that happens when the child is young, that can very, very much feel like an abandonment issue. I will also say, too, that can happen in adolescence, that can happen in adulthood, that can happen if your spouse, your wife or husband suddenly dies. That can trigger those abandonment fears in us, especially if it was sudden. So that doesn't just have to happen in our childhood. The loss of a loved one can increase those abandonment fears almost at any age. And then third and finally, betrayal and rejection. Rejection is very closely related to abandonment because, yes, we're feeling rejected, pushed away, but at the same time, we're also not having somebody be there for us. So experiencing betrayal or rejection in relationships, whether they're romantic or platonic, can certainly trigger feelings of abandonment as well. And this includes attachment injuries or trauma that I discussed in another podcast as well. Find the one that's talking about, and I forget which episode that is, but there's one that's talking about attachment injuries. And certainly abandonment and rejection can cause significant attachment injuries in our adult relationships. They don't just have to be in our childhood. So those are some of the reasons that abandonment trauma or fear can be created. Now let's talk about what are some of the symptoms. What does it actually look like in us and in our relationships that when we have abandonment trauma or fears, how does that play out? Well, the first one is a constant fear of rejection or abandonment. A lot of anxiety can come along with this. So there's a constant dread of being left or abandoned by others. Difficulty trusting others. So we struggle to form deep and meaningful relationships due to the fear of being hurt. If you think that somebody's going to leave you, are you going to get close to them? Are you going to let them in? Are you going to be vulnerable with them? Of course not. Of course not. So we're always sort of stiff-arming our relationships. We're only letting people get so close because underlining all of our relationships is the idea that, well, ultimately people are going to leave me. And I know this, and I'm acting on this internalized model I have of others. Third, clingy behavior, a need for constant reassurance and attention in order to avoid feeling abandoned. So as I said at the outset with this couple as an example, the husband would often just acquiesce and say, yes, whatever you want, dear. And he would go out of his way to make sure she was happy. He would try to avoid any kind of emotional arguments or emotional discussions for fear it would upset her. And all of this was contributed and a symptom of his abandonment fear. So very clingy behavior oftentimes, the need for constant reassurance. Do you love me? Do you still want to be with me? What do you like about me? What do you love about me? These things are signposts to deeper issues inside the individual that are screaming fear of abandonment. Another one, avoidance of intimacy. As I've said before, we don't get close to somebody that we think is going to leave us. And so we tend to have a wall up, and we tend to not let anybody, if very few people, in behind that wall. So we just oftentimes avoid intimacy. So self-sabotage can certainly play a role and look as a symptom of abandonment trauma. Engaging in behaviors that push others away to prevent being abandoned. So we can sabotage relationships for fear of abandonment, but oftentimes we can get creative about it and make it look like it's the other person doing things as opposed to us being able to actually embrace and own our abandonment fears. So we play a little Jedi mind trick on us there, thinking that, oh, well, they just weren't really that into me, or, oh, they have issues, or there was lots of red flags with that other person. When if we pull back some layers of that, what we actually see is the individual is acting in a way that confirms their abandonment fears, and they're the one that's actually sabotaging their relationship. And finally, of course, depression and anxiety can be big harbingers of abandonment trauma. So feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and anxiety related to abandonment fears. People who feel like they're going to be abandoned can be depressed and anxious. And that makes perfect sense to me. If I walked around with an internal model that others were going to leave me, I might have a tinge of sadness and anxiety to everything I did as well. So I understand why that's there. But getting to the root of where that is really important. Being able to understand the internalized model of other that they're going to leave me, I'm not going to measure up, I'm not going to be able to hold on to this person. They're maybe we put them on a pedestal and they're too good for me. I can't believe I got them in the first place. These are all sort of tricks that our mind can play on us that goes to the root of that abandonment trauma. So those are some symptoms of what it looks like internally as well as in our relationship. Let's talk about how do we heal abandonment trauma. So if we recognize we have this, if we know we have a history of inconsistent parenting, if we know we have a history of being abandoned or rejected or lost a mother, father, grandparent at a young age, and this is something we struggle with, what are some things we can do to help heal this inside of us? Well, the first thing I think we can do is be able to reach out and get some help if we need to. I'm sure you have good local people in your community where you live, and so I encourage you to reach out and get some professional help. The reason is it's really hard to see all the little ways that this internalized model we have of abandonment trauma plays out in our relationship. For the reasons that I just mentioned, sometimes our mind is not always our friend. Sometimes it can play little tricks on us, and it's difficult for us to be able to see, oh, that's why I did that, or that may be why I'm feeling that way. And having somebody else that can help you explore that can help you really understand the ways that you live out your abandonment trauma in your everyday life. And that includes your protective maneuvers and the way you architect your relationships. Maybe you architect them in a way that you never let yourself get close to somebody else, and yet you wonder why you don't have close friends. And so a professional can really help you begin to see those types of things. Another thing you can do is you can process and understand your internal experience better. You can explore the root causes of the abandonment trauma and develop a deeper understanding of its impact. So being able to identify all the ways that the abandonment trauma plays out in your life and the way that you build protection around yourself because of that fear, as I've mentioned, is really important for you to be able to understand and hopefully be more transparent to yourself, because that's a goal. The goal is to be able to recognize, oh, I push people away, or I have a history of sabotaging relationships, or there are times when I don't let people too close. I don't open up and reveal and be vulnerable with others, which helps me actually connect to others. Instead, I get closed off, I shut down, I turn the focus or the spotlight on somebody else. So we want to be able to strip away some of those layers and have you be more transparent to yourself. And engaging in that process can really help you see how this core fear plays out in your relationships and in your life. And then also building healthy relationships. So once you begin doing this exploration and you begin seeing the ways that your protection prevents you from feeling closer and connected to your partner, then you have an opportunity to be able to challenge that. You've got an opportunity that you can now construct or architect your life differently than the way you have always done it. And you begin to meet and draw people in and build healthy relationships, people that can love you, that you can begin to trust, people that can begin to build you up, that have your back, that show up for you, that are there when bad things happen without needing to ask for something in return. Whatever kinds of experience you had previously, you can begin to build relational experiences that are healthy in its place. Also, developing self-compassion. So this is important because along with abandonment trauma and abandonment fear, which is a core fear of others leaving us, there is also a simultaneous fear that we are not good enough. We are not somebody that deserves to be loved. And so it's really important to be able to have self-compassion and recognize the ways that core belief about yourself might live out. And so having healthy relationships, breaking down those walls where we can begin to let others in and be vulnerable with others. I don't pretend to think that's easy at all. I know my words come across as if they're saying, oh, just do this. It's no big deal. But no, I understand, because I work with people every day to try to help them do that. I understand that what I'm asking is a tremendous risk. It's like scaling Mount Everest, that it's not at all easy and appears fraught with danger. And so I understand what I'm asking, but I also understand the huge benefit in being able to have your own sense of self-worth and acceptance, and having and developing more self-compassion can help you do that. And then finally, challenging those negative beliefs. When you find yourself saying to yourself, oh, this person's going to leave me, or scrutinizing somebody's behavior as if, oh, this is a signpost, this is a symptom that they're on the way out the door. Ask yourself, do I have evidence for that? Or is this my abandonment trauma coming up, and is it shaping the way I'm seeing and experiencing this interaction with my partner? And so begin to challenge those negative thoughts and beliefs and begin to replace them. You need to get better at determining, is this experience I'm feeling in this moment coming from me, or is it the intentions of my partner? Because more often than not, it's really coming from inside you, but it's really hard to see that because you're actually projecting those fears onto the situation. Not all the time. I'm not saying that your partner's never said, I can't do this anymore, or I'm going to leave you. And those are real words. I understand that might be happening or might have happened in your relationships. But I also understand that there's a lot of times that internally you have this fear, and you then begin to project, and your mind begins to race that the inevitable is going to happen, when in fact you're more likely projecting that fear onto the situation and interpreting those sets of circumstances that way. So being able to challenge those negative beliefs is very, very important as well. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this particular episode. I thought this was important to kind of drill down. We talk about trauma a lot of times and lump some things together, but I think it's important to get more specific on different types of traumas. And certainly abandonment trauma is a big one that we have to deal with and struggle with in our relationships. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Feel free to continue to give me feedback. I love hearing from you guys. And until next time, we'll talk to you then.
Thank you for listening to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast for the healing of attachment trauma. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at traumafreerelationship.com. Be sure to look for our next episode on your favorite streaming service.